everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Knowledge and Know-How with NetApp Support. My name is Dwight Cranford, and I'm on the leadership team in the NetApp Support Center. Today, you're going to hear from Matteo Novakavici, who's a NetApp escalation engineer in our StorageGRID space, and also Rob Binder, who's an escalation engineer in our own command space. As I mentioned, this is episode 5, so if you haven't been able to attend the first 4, you can visit our YouTube channel. It's called NetApp KB TV, and you can see all the episodes listed there. Just an overview of why we're doing these webinars. So we want to be able to reach out to our customers when we're not working a support case, provide information about the NetApp Support Center, some knowledge that we have, share some of the knowledge that may be able to eliminate even needing a support case, and expediting resolution to your issues. We also want to build an effective partnership with all of our customers. Be proactive, not wait for issues to occur and not wait for you to create that support case, and hopefully to improve the overall customer support experience that you're seeing. And also, like we're doing today, we want to provide some tips and tricks on setup and maintenance of our tools and help you better manage your environment. So with that, today, we're going to be talking about ActiveIQ Unified Manager, some of the features, some troubleshooting, some takeaways, and we'll provide some resources, and also StorageGRID. We're going to talk about some DP strategies and ILM workflow. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob now, and he's going to take you through the AIQ portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Dwight. As Dwight mentioned, my name is Rob Binder. I'm an escalation engineer with NetApp, and I'm going to be talking to you today about ActiveIQ Unified Manager with a focus on version 9.7. We'll be covering some of the new features and user experience, troubleshooting, some key takeaways, and at the very end, we're going to have a link to access documentation so you can read up more about the product. For the new features, I'll be covering the new dashboard and user experience, the security dashboard, the workload analyzer, integration between Unified Manager and the ActiveIQ NetApp.com web portal, integration with NetApp Service Level Manager, VMware awareness, and enhancements to the backup and restore process. Here we can see the new Unified Manager dashboard. We redesigned it starting with 9.7 to more closely align with System Manager. So if you've looked at System Manager and the new experience in ONTAP 9.7, we'll have a very similar feel. We've gone with a card-based approach so that you can see the different sections such as capacity, performance information, security, or management actions. The management actions are quick, easy things that Unified Manager has diagnosed with quick remedies that can be done either through the Fix It button or providing quick ONTAP CLI commands that can be run to correct issues. The security dashboard. Like the main dashboard, you have the ability to toggle between looking at all of your clusters or individual clusters. You can see information regarding compliance either at the cluster level or SVM level. If you click on the question mark here or here, it will provide information regarding what it is checking for at those particular levels. These are based off of recommendations using the NetApp Security Hardening Guide. These will be things such as Telnet, FIPS, or other security settings. You can also view volume encryption and other types of compliance. The Workload Analyzer. With the Workload Analyzer, you can go in and add a particular workload, be it a volume or LUN, specify a time range that you want to look at, and then see both performance information and capacity information all within a single pane. You can then toggle the different sections to get breakdowns as far as looking at more details. You can also dive in to either the performance or capacity by clicking on the hyperlinks for the details. This allows you to troubleshoot it without having to go to the different sections in the UI and toggle through. ActiveIQ and Unified Manager integration. The AIQ website can provide proactive and predictive recommendations and security analysis based off of auto support information that is sent from NetApp clusters. Now with version 9.7, Unified Manager can pull this information in, the same as with the AIQ website, by downloading a set of rules. These will then show up either under Management Tasks or the Security Dashboard as events that you can then configure alerts on to notify yourself, and then take corrective actions based off of that. The advantage to this is that you can dynamically do it, so whenever there is a new update to the rule in the AIQ portal, it can pull that down to Unified Manager without having to wait for new events in the next Unified Manager release. NSLM. NetApp Service Level Manager used to be a standalone product that would allow you to provision workloads and assign service level objectives to them. In prior versions, this required a separate server running NSLM, integrating with Unified Manager to pull data from Unified Manager as a data source so that you can perform these tasks. This was a subscription-based product. Now with version 9.7, they are now incorporated into a single product, so you no longer need a separate server for this. That allows you to take all the actions that you would normally have taken in NSLM and do them directly in Unified Manager. VMware Awareness. With version 9.7, you can now add your vCenter servers into Unified Manager as a data source. This allows you to monitor performance and storage information regarding your VM machines, all within Unified Manager. Here's a quick look at what you might see in Unified Manager. You can see the compute information, the storage information. You can look at capacity and performance information and see the overall topology. Unified Manager backup and restore enhancements. Unified Manager backups consist of two things: a backup metadata file that has all the information it needs to do the restore, and SQL dumps. The very first backup that you would take would create a full SQL dump of the database, and every backup afterwards would be an incremental. The challenge with this in prior versions is if your first backup was from months prior and you needed to do a restore, it would have to restore that full backup and every single incremental in that chain in order to do the restore process. This could lead to very long restore times in the range of hours or possibly even days. With Unified Manager 9.7, we now offer two backup schedules. One is the regular backup schedule, when you want to configure your backups, and the second is a full backup schedule, which allows you to configure when you wanted to rotate that full backup and start a new chain. The advantage of this is that it will reduce the amount of time that restores take by decreasing the overall chain. Any questions?
Hey, I think we do have a couple of questions in here, Rob. Let's see. The first one is, sorry, let me just get them lined up here real quick. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A session, and we will make sure that we go through them and answer them. So the first one is, does my data store have to be on a NetApp cluster to monitor my VMs?
The answer to that is yes, it does have to be on NetApp storage. In order to properly map from compute all the way to the storage, it does need to reside on NetApp storage.
Okay. The next one is, NSLM required a license. Now that it has been incorporated into ActiveIQ Unified Manager, do we still need a license?
At this time, you do not require a license for that functionality. It's all incorporated into Unified Manager.
All right, we have one more here. How do I integrate ActiveIQ Unified Manager with AIQ if I have a dark site?
Okay, so if you have a Unified Manager running in a network that can't access the AIQ website to pull down the rules, you can download them manually from the support site and then import them into Unified Manager. We recommend doing that at least once a month if you are running a dark site.
All right. We do have another one here, Rob.
Okay.
our VMware is 6.6.0, not able to add it to AIQ Unified Manager. Are there any options?
Well, I recommend taking a look at our interoperability matrix and our documentation to make sure that that version is directly supported. We can always enable debugging if we need to look into why it failed to add. We also need to make sure that the user that you're using has the appropriate roles within vCenter.
Okay. And one more, is there a direct upgrade path for OCUM to 9.7 with the integrated NSLM?
Okay. You can upgrade from up to 2 versions prior, from 9.5 to up to 9.7. We do have documentation regarding the incorporation of NSLM starting with Unified Manager 9.7.
Okay. All right, and we can follow up on these after the conclusion of your presentation. So okay. I don't see any other ones in the Q&A right now, so you can go ahead and continue.
Thank you. Let's get started with troubleshooting Unified Manager. ActiveIQ Unified Manager consists of 3 primary services. The MySQL, which is the backend database, OCIE, or also called the on-command service in Windows, which functions as both the kind of brains of the application as well as the web UI, and the acquisition service, also called OCIE AU, which performs the polling, which gets the information from the data source consumed by Unified Manager. All 3 of these must be functioning properly in order for the application to properly run, to be able to monitor and alert on your systems. So let's take a look at some of the log locations. I'm going to cover both Windows and Linux. We'll start with Windows first. So here we can see the path for Windows and the logs based off the specific services. The reason we want to take a look at this is in case we are unable to capture a support bundle, sometimes it's necessary to go into these particular locations and then capture the individual logs, or just if we need to request them without getting the full support bundle, you can directly look at those and upload those to us. Likewise, here's the location in Linux and both the OVA. Let's get started with taking a look at some of the notable logs that we often end up reviewing. The server.log will show the status of the deployment. So when the services get started for OCIE, we will see those getting logged. If there's any issues with them getting deployed, we can take a look at the server.log for any type of errors with getting them started. The upgrade log is going to capture the upgrade process whenever you go through and update the application. If there's any issues there, we can then note them and try to take corrective actions to fix the upgrade. For troubleshooting calls into Unified Manager or trying to track who's logging in or accessing which pages, you can take a look at either the access_log or the audit log. One of the primary sets of logs that we look at is ocmserver.log and the ocmerror.log. The ocmerror log will have the same information as the ocmserver.log, but just the error level events. These will handle things such as the overall functionality of the application. The zappy outbound log will cover certain types of outbound calls from Unified Manager to your clusters. These might be SnapMirror related, Metro cluster related, or capture certain hardware information for the system. The AU log helps track information related to the acquisition service, so if there's any issues there, we can take a look at that to see if there's problems polling. The server mega log will cover things like if we receive the information but we're having trouble either parsing it or inserting the database, we may see errors logged there. And lastly, the acquisition recording. So if we need to troubleshoot something, so if you're looking in your UI and the numbers don't look quite right, we can always take a look at those recording files to validate the calls being made to your cluster as well as what the cluster is returning, so we can kind of verify what we're seeing and what's being returned. So here are some quick commands and things that you might want to check. So I've provided some quick commands for manually tarring up the logs in a Linux or OVA environment, if you're unable to capture support bundle, or in a Windows environment, you can use 7-zip or another tool for compressing those log files. If you're having issues accessing the web UI, or it's not coming up, you're getting a 404, we often recommend taking a look at the deployments folders. So here's the path in Linux and in Windows. So these might fail to deploy due to things like the system running out of memory, antivirus software possibly interfering with the application, or if the system isn't shut down properly, when it's rebooted, they may not come up properly. When dealing with installing, you want to make sure that you have the correct version of MySQL and that you aren't running any other databases on the system. So you want to make sure that if you're running an older version, you want to remove that or remove any other databases that might have become pre-installed. With firewall issues, you want to consult our installation guides to make sure that you note the required ports that need to be open. So you can check things like IP tables in Linux or the Windows Firewall Service in Windows to make sure that you have the required ports open on both outbound and inbound. So let's talk about the upgrade process. I'm going to cover both Windows and Linux. In both cases, you're going to want to make sure that prior to any type of upgrade that you get a backup. The recommended backup method would be taking a VM snapshot. So you're going to want to stop the services, shut the host down, take a cold snapshot, bring it up, go through the upgrade process. If the upgrade completes fine and you can validate that everything's up and running, you can go in and delete that snapshot. Otherwise, if the upgrade fails, we may want to capture the upgrade logs and then revert the host to get you back up and running. If you're unable to take a VM snapshot, or if it's not applicable to your environment, we recommend at least getting a application level backup. So I provided some of the config and registry information config files in a Windows environment, and likewise in a Linux environment. So we've made some changes to the installer and the upgrader for Unified Manager. Starting with 9.7, we've moved from requiring you to install multiple RPMs in Red Hat or CentOS and simplified it down to a single RPM. We now include Python as part of this installation. This is part of the script used when you click on the Fix It button under the maintenance tasks, allowing you to correct those issues. We've also gone from MySQL 5.7 to MySQL 8. If you are upgrading, you want to make sure that you check our interoperability matrix to make sure that your versions of your software are compatible. So for example, with WFA, you want to make sure that you have version 5.1 or greater installed. We've also changed it so that with 9.7, we no longer support clustering with a Windows cluster. So if you're running Unified Manager as a cluster in a Windows environment, you want to make sure that you unconfigure that before upgrading. Support bundles. Support bundles are the log collection tool for NetApp support. These include configuration information, system logs, as well as Unified Manager application logs. If you were to log into the OVA with your maintenance user, it would automatically pull up the maintenance console, and you can go into the support and diagnostics option to generate the support bundle. In a Windows or Linux environment, you just need to pull up a command prompt, type in maintenance_console, and then it'll bring you to the same maintenance console, and you can go into support diagnostics. The menus may be a little bit different between versions, so don't worry about that if it looks a little bit different. For more information, you can also go to these KBs to follow the steps on how to generate a support bundle if you need to upload one for a support case. So here are 3 of the common topics that come up with regards to backups and restores. So we've documented some of the changes with regards to scheduling in Unified Manager 9.7, how to break the backup chain in prior versions. Following these steps, you can follow the procedure to issue the MySQL commands that will allow you to break that backup chain, start a new full backup to help reduce the amount of time it takes to go through the restore process. For some of our customers in Linux environments or running the OVA, they may run into issues with the backup failing or running out of temp space in /temp. Starting with 9.7, we've move that temp location to the data location. So you don't have to worry about running out of space on your root partition. And so you can follow this KB if you're running a prior version, and it'll provide the steps on how to change that temp location used for the backups and restores. So configuring your backups. So if you go into the WebUI 9.7, you can go to Backup Settings, and you can configure your backup here. So you have options such as where you want to back it up to, how many backups you want to keep, and keep in mind you need to click on the box to schedule the backups, and you have a choice daily or weekly. Bear in mind that this is all scheduled. You can't currently do an on-demand backup, but if you want to, you can just change the time and put it a minute in the future. To schedule when you want to rotate the full backups, you're going to need to log into the UMCLI, and then you can go in and set the option of when you want it to rotate these. Please note that it's in cron notation, so you can see here where we've rotated it. You have your full backup, your incrementals, and then we now have a new full backup. When we troubleshoot issues with monitoring, at times we need to look at the cluster logs. So here are the cluster logs that we may end up reviewing if we need to troubleshoot. Now, the primary ones that we often end up having to look at are the Apache audit logs, EMS, and troubleshooting issues with CCMA files. So when we need to troubleshoot calls into a cluster to validate that it's reaching the cluster, that the cluster's not reporting any errors or access issues, we'll take a look at the audit log and Apache logs. For the EMS logs, we review those when we need to troubleshoot events occurring on a cluster. So disk failures, things going down. If we need to troubleshoot that in Unified Manager, we can take a look at the EMS events to know when it occurred on the cluster, so we can try to match this up to Unified Manager and take a look at those times, so we can look at the logs to try to validate why we may not have logged an event. With CCMA files, Unified Manager uses that to get performance information from the cluster. These are automatically generated on the cluster, and Unified Manager will retrieve it via the SPI, so you can use things to test to make sure that we're able to actually retrieve those information. So here are some of the common and top issues that we can run into when we have to troubleshoot Unified Manager. Issues with the services not coming up properly. So if you have to schedule a maintenance window for your Unified Manager to patch it, update it, reboot it, you want to make sure that you stop the services first and then go ahead and reboot. And then after the reboot, make sure that everything gets deployed and all the services come up correctly. Upgrade failures. When you go through the upgrade process, you're going to want to make sure that you follow the upgrade path. So there is a limit to how many versions you can jump between when you're going through upgrading your current version to the target version that you want to go to. So we have a KB article that covers the upgrade path. You also want to make sure that you take a look at the release notes and the download page for any warnings regarding any issues that you might potentially run into when going through that upgrade process or capturing any of the gotchas. Again, prior to doing an upgrade, make sure that you have a backup. Our recommended version, or recommended backup method is taking a VM snapshot. That's going to be the fastest way to revert your machine. Acquisition failures. When we troubleshoot acquisition failures, we're going to want to know, is this failing every time, or is it an intermittent issue? That helps us troubleshoot when we need to look at the logs so that we can match up the times of the failures. You want to make sure that the user that Unified Manager uses to pull your cluster has the necessary application roles on the cluster and that the password is up to date. You also want to make sure that your cluster doesn't have an expired certificate. So you can follow this KB to go in and generate a new certificate on your cluster, as an expired certificate can cause polling to fail. You'll receive events such as cluster not reachable. For troubleshooting missed alerts and events, you want to first check to make sure that you aren't getting any acquisition failures. You may see things such as cluster not reachable. With troubleshooting these, you want to note when the event occurred so that we can troubleshoot if the event was logged or if an alert was triggered. If there was an event, you can then go on the event, click on the event details, and you can look at applicable alerts. If no alert is configured, you can click through there to generate an alert for your event. Please note that Unified Manager doesn't do real-time monitoring. It pulls based off of intervals. So for capacity information in inventory, it's on a 15-minute interval. If you require more real-time notification for events that might occur on your cluster, you can configure EMS subscription. With that, anytime an EMS message is logged that Unified Manager is subscribed to, the cluster will notify Unified Manager and it will generate an event based off of the EMS severity. You can then configure your alerts to notify you on that, and you can go into the event details to find more information about the particular EMS event. For questions regarding securing your Unified Manager environment and options with regards to the OVA, binary installations such as Windows, Red Hat, or CentOS, you can click on the following KB that will provide you with information regarding the options for securing things. With regards to antivirus software, if you're going to install antivirus software on your Unified Manager instance, we highly recommend that you exclude both the installation path as well as the database location, as this can cause antivirus software can cause delays with the startup of the services, or it can potentially lock files or corrupt your database. So here are some key takeaways that I want to cover. With Unified Manager, you can automate, manage, report, get event notification and alert notification on your Unified Manager instance. With 9.7, you can now directly monitor your VMs in a VMware environment by adding your vCenter servers into Unified Manager as a data source. With integration of a NetApp Service Level Manager, you can now provision workloads and assign SLO policies based off of them, and then troubleshoot those with the Workload Analyzer. We now also have integration with ActiveIQ, so you can download those rules and generate events based off of security or other configuration recommendations for your environment. Questions?
Again, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. I know we've had a few that have been answered. We do have one. How do I recover if my MySQL database becomes corrupt?
So if your database, if MySQL will not start and it runs into corruption, we can always go in and try to modify the MySQL config file to put it in recovery mode. If we are unable to recover it, our options are either to revert to a VM snapshot if one is available prior to the issue occurring, or we can restore from a backup. So restoring from a backup requires a functioning version of MySQL, so it may be necessary to either redeploy in the case of an OVA, copy your backups over to the new instance, and upload that backup to it and perform the restore process, or in a Windows and Linux environment, it may be necessary to uninstall the application, reinstall it, and copy your backups back in, and then trigger the restore process.
All right.
Other questions?
I do not see any more in the queue at this time.
Okay. For more information about Unified Manager, you can click on the links that will take you to our documentation, view videos and podcasts, and get access to technical reports or access to our communities. Thank you.
All right, and that concludes the AIQ portion of the webinar. We will be able to answer Q&A in the chat, so if you come up with questions, please put them in there and we'll answer those in the chat. We're now going to move on to the StorageGRID portion of the webinar, and we'll hand it over to Matteo.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Dwight. Okay, well, you know what event will be occurring in a couple weeks, right? Wait for it. Yep, you guessed it, NetApp Insight 2020. What's pretty cool about this year's Insight is that it has gone all digital and is free this year. Simply register and start picking the sessions that interest you, and away you go. Want to know what else is pretty cool? I will also be speaking at Insight 2020 this year. So if you like what you see in today's session, please sign up for my session at Insight next month. Hope to see you there. Thanks. Okay, my Insight plug is done, I promise. Welcome back to the 5th installment of NetApp's Knowledge and Know-How. Today, I'll be talking about data protection strategies and ILM concepts. My name is Matteo Nowakowicz. I am with the StorageGRID group. I'm based out of Vancouver, Canada. I've been with the product for about 10-ish years, a little over. So, without further ado, let's get started. On the agenda for today, our first topic is going to be data protection strategies. So, this topic can be very subjective, right? You talk to a network person and trying to prevent a hack from entering the network. That is obviously, they are obviously trying to obtain sensitive confidential data, right? That would be a data protection strategy. But for the sake of this conversation, I'll be focusing on StorageGRID native tools to help with data protection strategies. You can see here there's a couple topics to go over. I'll be kind of glimpsing over all of them within the time frame that I have allocated for this session. But, of course, if there's anything you want to cover a little more in depth, please ping me offline or contact one of the team members from this seminar or anyone from NetApp, and we can go over some of these strategies in place. Our second topic is going to be ILM concepts. So, again, I kind of go over basic principles of what to keep in mind when you're, say, building out rules or building out a policy, kind of provide a very basic ILM policy as well. And our third topic, which it's not really a topic, but I kind of go over what we just went over, what you should really take away from all of this, right? Answer any questions you might have. And of course, I'm going to be plugging the Insight 2020 again. Remember, free event. Definitely try to take advantage of it. And first topic, no client modify. So this option is actually disabled by default, but once enabled, the following requests will be denied. So attempts to delete a bucket, denied. Requests to modify existing object data, that's also denied. Any user-defined metadata or any S3 object tagging will all be denied. So also what you need to note here is the setting does not apply to buckets with versioning enabled. Versioning sort of already prevents such actions. And I'm not going to get into S3 versioning. There is a whole slew of documentation and probably better videos illustrating the topic of S3 versioning. So, yeah, moving on. Anyways, so also keep in mind that this option is a system-wide setting. So you just saw the example of enabling it for the grid. If you want to take advantage of this setting as one step in the whole data protection model, note that this will affect all tenants and buckets because it's a system-wide setting. All right, next topic, object verification. This is a pretty neat method that StorageGRID employs to ensure data sovereignty or data protection, right? The StorageGRID system actually verifies the integrity of object data on your storage nodes via two different verification methods. The first is actually background verification. And this will essentially check for corruption of objects. And it does this perpetually in the background, automatically, continuously, like forever and ever and ever for the lifetime of the grid. For the lifetime of the storage node. And you can see here the different options, right? Essentially, you can change the rate at which the node is checking for corrupt objects. And you can obviously see how long it takes to complete one full scan of every object on every range DB. The second method of object verification is foreground verification. And this is not to be confused with that last slide with background verification. They actually do very different tasks. And although the following demo will kind of show you that the foreground verify and the background verify live will coexist within the same sort of realm under the API, they actually do very different tasks, right? So foreground verification will actually check for missing objects, right? And where background perpetually runs and checks for corruption of objects, right? So as this demo is illustrating, foreground verification runs manually. This is something that's user triggered and can be run on a per LUN basis, right? Or so per data store, per range DB, whatever you want to call the object stores that reside under the storage node, right? So typically this process will run if there was an outage of some sort, right? A brownout, a blackout, something caused the storage node to be down, or you would run this as part of the post-recovery procedures when recovering a storage node, right? Ensuring that if there was data on that node, that you want to check for any missing objects and make sure that that data gets re-injected back into the grid. Next topic is stored object encryption. So this feature essentially enables encryption of all object data as it is ingested. So once it's ingested, essentially at rest on disk, the object will be encrypted. So this is one of those features that will undeniably provide the utmost data protection, because if the data is ever somehow obtained or compromised, the data that is actually stored cannot be retrieved in any readable format, right? So technically, someone may have obtained that content, yes, but, and there's a big but, there's pretty much nothing that can be done with that data, right? Also, keep in mind that this is a grid-wide setting which will encrypt every single object in the grid, right? Also note, this is actually disabled by default, but if you do enable it, you have the option of using AES 128 or AES 256 bit ciphers are currently supported. If you can take anything away from the object encryption portion of this, is that by employing encryption, you will add a lot more overhead, specifically overhead around CPU, right? If you enable this and your storage node becomes sluggish or your grid becomes sluggish, then you have to start weighing the pros, cons, risks of enabling such a feature, right? Encryption will take a big hit on performance, and perhaps a way around that, depending on budget, etc., is to add more storage nodes to offset the encryption overhead, if encryption is part of your data protection strategy. All right, this slide will go over the workflow when enabling or disabling stored object encryption. So first, once enabled, all newly ingested objects are encrypted. So what that means is no change is actually made to the existing objects on disk. So if that is something that you want to ensure you do, you say you did not encrypt, you've ingested 1 year of data, and you want to encrypt that data, you will have to re-ingest that data. So same thing, if you, once it's enabled and you ingested a bunch of data, that data will remain encrypted, right? So if you disable encryption at that point, what ends up happening is only newly ingested objects will be unencrypted, but you have a batch of data that has been encrypted. Same philosophy. If you want all of your data to be unencrypted, make sure that you do not have encryption enabled, and you will have to re-ingest said data that came in while it was ingested. Next topic to consider for data protection strategies is stored object hashing. What is this, you might ask? Well, hashing is used to verify that an object or file or key has not been altered since it was originally ingested. This is done automatically with StorageGRID product at all times by producing a checksum before the object has been transmitted, and then once again once it reaches its destination. So the object can be considered genuine only if both checksums are identical on each end. By default, all objects are actually hashed using the SHA-1 algorithm. But for added protection security, you can change that to SHA-256. But again, bear in mind, adding an extra cipher suite or a different cipher suite for the hashing algorithm will add a little bit more overhead to each object as they are ingested and retrieved and so on. So keep that in mind, just like the encryption, bear that in mind if you were to change the hashing algorithm from the default of SHA-1 to 256. Our last topic on data protection is probably the most important feature, and I mean, the next topic, which is ILM concepts, is essentially data protection and at its finest. This is exactly what StorageGRID does, and ILM is the quintessential highlight of the StorageGRID product for data protection. But in the context of this presentation, I'm kind of separating them, right? But this last topic is the perfect segue into that next topic, which is ILM rules. So under 11.3 and above, when you create a new ILM rule now, you can actually choose the way you would like to protect content on ingest. I talk about this more in depth in the next slide. All right, our next topic is going to go over the three choices that you had that I went over in the last slide. The first option, which is now the default in 11.3, whenever you create a rule, you can choose between the three. This is the default. Balance is essentially on ingest, we apply whatever your ILM rule is for the object. If we cannot satisfy that on ingest, then we go back to the traditional method of dual commit, which is just to store the two copies at the site of ingest. So we recommend applying this if you have a single site because it will improve operations, it will improve ingest, and it will also decrease the amount of grid operations. I'll touch upon that during the dual commit when I kind of go over the traditional way of the way we used to do that. The second method that you can employ is strict. So essentially, this is on ingest, apply the ILM policy, apply the ILM rule. If we cannot apply the ILM rule on ingest, we do not accept the content. So you can look at this two ways. The pro being that you have absolute certainty and data protection and applying your ILM rule on ingest. So that means that, hey, no matter what, if you're ILM, you have that content. There is no ifs, ands, or buts or in-betweens of storing the content temporarily and then applying a policy. No, if we can't accept it on ingest, if we can't apply the ILM rule on ingest, then we're not doing anything with it, right? Obviously, that is that whole double-edged sword is the con that you might be a little more prone to ingest failure because you know, if you have a maintenance and the node is down or you're doing a firmware update and that knocks out your ability to actually fulfill an ILM and you have this enabled, you're not going to be able to ingest that content. So use with caution, but it has its place, especially for customers that, you know, need to ensure the integrity of that data at all times is at a certain high level of certainty. And the traditional method, which is still an option, is dual commit. This is sort of the performance might seem like it is better, but it ultimately does create more grid operations because of the traditional method at which we have to store the content and then delete it after the ILM policy has been applied to it, right? So we have to clean up the metadata, clean up the object payload. And this isn't the best data protection strategy because if you lose a site and this object has not had the ILM policy applied to it, then you potentially risk losing the content. So not recommended. We recommend balance depending on the setup of your grid. Okay, on to ILM concepts. But first, I want to do a bit of a ILM workflow, kind of life cycle of an object, high level view. Don't focus too much on what some of these graphs illustrate. I'll be talking, for instance, a little bit more about ILM rules literally in the next slide. So don't focus too much on it. I'm not going to focus too much on it. I just want to give you a kind of a short, brief overview of what happens with the ILM workflow. So you need to have a rule in place which will satisfy an object's objective for whatever your business SLAs might be, right? Those rules need to be encompassed in an active ILM policy, right? With those two fundamentals in mind, what ends up happening on object ingest is that the policy will evaluate those objects based on whatever rule is met, right? So once that rule is met and the object has been placed wherever it may be for however long it may be placed there, in the background, we have a tool or process that ends up scanning all objects in the grid perpetually for ever and ever and ever. So if an object, if you haven't changed your ILM policy in 3 years, we will constantly just scan each object to make sure that it still has the current policy in place. If you change a policy, we will scan that object based on the new policy and adhere to whatever that rule might be. So bear that in mind as you craft ILM rules and the repercussions of what might happen if you change a rule in mid-flight or a policy in mid-flight. What happens to the existing data? All right, moving on to what an ILM rule is. The meaning of the word ILM rule is no different from the word rule in any context, right? A rule is a set of criteria that meets an objective. So the ILM rules are based on the following objectives or criteria, right? So one, in just behavior, I went over this a couple minutes ago regarding, and in this example, it's balanced, but that is one of the first objectives or first criteria. The second one is which objects should be stored. And remember, a rule can apply to any and all objects. They could apply to belonging to a specific tenant account, which in this example is tenant A, right? Or to vary, or the object can be stored based on specific metadata values, right? So that's where that filtering criteria comes into play, right? And this one doesn't have any criteria in this example, right? So another objective that needs to be met here is the storage type and the location, right? So regarding type, this just essentially means, is it going to be a replicated copy or is it going to be a erasure coded copy, right? That's all that means by storage type. And as far as location goes, that involves creating a storage pool. And is this rule going to apply to, is the object that data coming in going to apply to write it to storage nodes, or is it going to go to a cloud storage pool, right? Those are sort of your location conditions. And 4, which is, it is very important. It's how and when objects are retained and how objects over time change the object storage location and type of copies over its life cycle, right? So in this example, you kind of see here that we stored the copy of this content from this tenant in 3 data centers for the first 2 years. And then after 2 years, we place only 1 copy on archive, on the archive storage medium. So you kind of see here, that is a good example of why it's so important, right? How long it's retained for and where it's retained and for how long. All right, our next topic is going to be ILM policy, and essentially an ILM policy is just an ordered set of rules that determine how StorageGRID will end up managing that content over time, right? So what you need to know here is that a policy, what's very important are the rules are processed in the order at which they are shown in your UI, right, from top to bottom. So in the example here, I'm going to go from rule 1, rule 2, and rule 3. So essentially what happens on object ingest is the first rule will apply its criteria to the object. And if the object, depending on where it was ingested, from what tenant, or what criteria you may have as a rule, will store that data based on rule 1 if the condition is met. However, if rule 1 is not applied to the object, then you have your second rule potentially in your list of your policy. So the filtering criteria obviously goes against the object metadata, and it will see and evaluate against it. So if there is a match there, then this rule will apply to it, hence apply any of the conditions that we mentioned in the rules example in the last slide. So if it can be met, it will apply the conditions under rule 2. However, if rule 1's conditions don't meet and rule 2 conditions don't meet, let's just say rule 3 is sort of like your default, is your catch-all, right? This is just an example of a policy, right? This can obviously get very deep and ingrained into how a policy can be set up, right? But essentially, if your first 2 rules don't meet in a simplified policy here, you have a catch-all, and this, we're calling it rule 3, and it doesn't matter what is going on with this object. This rule will apply if the rules before it did not meet any of the conditions for the object's placement on ingest. Thanks for joining this webinar. If you liked it and you'd like to know more about managing StorageGRID alarms, come join me at Insight and sign up for that session. In the meantime, thanks for joining and see you next time.
All right, so Matteo, we do have a couple of questions in the queue for you. First one is, you mentioned object encryption is only available grid-wide. Are there any plans to make it per tenant or per bucket?
Yeah, at the moment, it is only supported grid-wide. I would say contact your account rep for any features that you do want within the product. As far as doing it from the client, doing it from the StorageGRID side. But StorageGRID does support a lot of, or most S3 API functions. So there is a server-side encryption header flag that S3 offers right now where you embed the header request from every client request, and that will essentially achieve the encryption per key, which could go only to that bucket, right? So that would be a method around that. But we could definitely take that offline and potentially raise a feature request to have that as a feature.
Okay. And the next one is, when creating an ILM rule, there's a temporary location option. What is that?
Yeah. So before I really answer that feature, that temporary locations, that's actually a deprecated feature as of 11.3. 11.4, I think it has it there, but we're not supporting it and we're not developing it. And for all extensive purposes, it will be removed in an upcoming version. So don't utilize it. But what that actually means is, in the case of the storage pool, in case the storage pool you originally want to ingest to is unavailable, that temporary location will be used. As soon as your preferred storage pool is available, that copy is then made to that storage pool, that preferred storage pool, and then the temporary copy is removed from the temp storage pool. So say you have a DC1 and a DC2, and you have a temporary location on ingest to DC2, that will write it to DC2 in the event DC1 cannot be made initially on ingest. But we're finding that feature is not really utilized, so that'll be removed.
Okay. I do not see any further questions in there. So we have a few more minutes. If you do have a question, make sure you put it in the Q&A section, and we'll get those answered. And I'm going to move on to a couple more things here. So a call to action, we do put these webinars together for you, our customers. So we want to hear from you. You will receive a survey. Let us know what you thought. Also send us topics that you want us to discuss. So something you want to see in a future webinar, please send it to us and we'll do our best to put that content together in one of our future episodes. So you can email us at ng-supportwebinars@netapp.com. And I mentioned in the beginning a playlist for our webinar series, and that link is here. You will receive all of this content as well after the webinar, so you can click on that and it should take you right to our playlist. You did hear Matteo plug a couple times Insight 2020, which is coming up here in a few short weeks. There are other sessions, not just Matteo's, from the support center. So we have the list here. Please go in and sign up and hear from some of our other experts in the support center. A lot of good content that we're putting out there, and please check these out. And I do have a link here where you can register for Insight if you haven't done so as of yet. And I do not see any more questions in the chat. So we do thank you for joining our webinar. We'll be putting content together for episode 6 that will come out here in a short few months. And again, please send us your feedback and please send us the topics that you want to hear us discuss. Thanks a lot for your time and attention. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.